Good evening and welcome to this special edition of the news today. The alleged mastermind of the Paris terror attacks, Abdelhamid Abbaoud, is dead, killed by French special forces during yesterday's police raid in the Saint Denis suburb. We will take an in-depth look at today's events in France, but first we begin here in Israel. The wave of terror to hit the country over the past 2 months seemed to have finally subsided, but this afternoon more deadly attacks. At least 5 people were killed in separate incidents, one in Tel Aviv and one in the West Bank in the Gush Etzion region. I-24 News correspondent Shani Nachshoni has the details.
A day of terror in Israel and the West Bank. 2 youth in their 20s were murdered and another wounded today in a South Tel Aviv office building by a Palestinian assailant. The terrorists went on a stabbing spree in a Jewish religious item store that also doubles as a synagogue.
Everybody started running. We ran upstairs. We saw a man lying on the ground bleeding. It was a place where people pray. In the middle of the afternoon prayers, someone got inside.
The first man stabbed in the neck was declared dead at the scene by paramedics. The second was evacuated to Ichilov Hospital, where he later died. The attacker then proceeded to stab a third person after escaping the building from an emergency exit. The victim was hospitalized with moderate wounds. The attacker was named as Raed Masalama, a Palestinian and father of 5 from the village of Dura, near Hebron, who had a working permit in Israel. He was apprehended by police. Just hours after the Tel Aviv attack, a terrorist perpetrated a shooting and car-ramming attack in the Gush Etzion area of the West Bank. 1 Israeli, 1 American tourist, and 1 Palestinian civilian were killed. Multiple others were injured. 2 of the attackers were killed by security forces, while another remained at large.
Yes, and with me right now here in the studio is Emmanuel Navon, Professor of International Relations at the Tel Aviv University. Good evening.
Good evening.
Also, Amir Oren, Government and Military Analyst at Haaretz and Daily Newspaper. Good evening. And Avi Sakharov, Senior Middle East Analyst. Good evening. Avi, we will start with you. The latest events here in Israel.
2 separate attacks. I don't see any kind of coordination between them, but one in the West Bank, one in Tel Aviv, of course. The thing that connects both are the people that did it, the terrorists themselves, that came from Hebron area. 2 villages not really close to Hebron, but in the region of Hebron. One Dir Samet and the other one in Dura, all southwest of the town of Hebron. I can only say that inside the city of Hebron, we see some kind of a decrease in the number of attacks. We see a dramatic decrease in the number of stabbing attacks, and it's quite interesting to see that the way that the Israeli security forces are pushing the local population does affect positively, but at the end of the day, we find the terrorists outside of Hebron.
How come it's coming from Hebron? What is happening there that is not happening in the rest of the West Bank?
Then again, it's the same old things that we know about Hebron for so many years, meaning some kind of a combination of radicalization, of Islam radicals supportive of Hamas and other factions in the Palestinian side, but also the local poverty, especially in the villages that I've mentioned. They are not very rich villages, and the fact that in a way surprised us today is that for the first time since the beginning of this so-called intifada or uprising, is that the terrorist is allowed to be in Israel, is working under permit inside Israel, and this is the first time that we see it.
Exactly in this point, and I'm sorry that I'm still not talking just about this. I want to make this point clear. A person who has permits to work here in Israel, a person who, from what we're seeing, doesn't have any problems, any social problems, a person that doesn't have any security background, father of 4 kids, what is making him working with Jewish people each and every day, what is making him to go just suddenly start stabbing people?
It's the $1 million question. I cannot really answer that. Maybe then again, it's the effect of Paris. It's the effect of ISIS. It's the effect of what happened a month plus ago in Al-Aqsa, in the Temple Mountain. So altogether, it brought some people to take those radical measures and to go and to act as terrorists. Now, my impression, at least, and this is what surprised me, that we were witnessing some kind of a calming down situation, that the population is not that enthusiastic about these kinds of attacks. Today in Hebron, and I was there this morning, I talked to some locals, I talked to some people that has some shops in the Kasbah area. They say, we're not interested in that. They themselves prevent young people from getting into the clashing points with the IDF, preventing them from doing all kinds of stabbing attacks against the IDF.
Prime Minister Netanyahu held some meetings this afternoon following the attacks with his ministers and security officials. And if one looks at the communique issued after the meetings.
It was very hard. It
yes,
was very hard.
And there is the indication there that the Hebron district is going to undergo some sort of operation. We will probably see over the next few days a concentration of forces, perhaps going house to house in certain villages like Dura or Yatta or others, in order to flush out terrorists and their dispatchers. But this is tactical, and the two attacks are tactical. Above the tactical, there should be the strategic level, and the strategic level is the context. Yes, there were terror incidents even when there was a peace process. Usually, they were then perpetrated by the enemies of peace, by organizations bent on the destruction of the peace process. But right now, there is a vacuum. And with the absence of any diplomatic process, the arena is left to those who, for whatever reason, it could be family, emotional, inspirational, religious, doesn't matter. They go out and do it, and you can't prevent it because, as you asked about this person in Tel Aviv with a permit, with a family, you cannot judge by the fact that 10 years ago or 10 months ago, he was vetted and there was no reason to suspect him because things change and something snaps in someone's mind.
Before we will continue this discussion, Eli Ochenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the news today, is right now in Gush Etzion. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. So the latest updates from you, Eli.
Yes, Lucy. Well, we might thought that the massive terror wave in which we saw daily terror attacks is behind us, but we still see sporadic terror attacks in different areas of Israel. With today, 5 people being murdered in 2 separate attacks. One in the center of Israel in Tel Aviv, and the second one in the Gush Etzion junction, a very sensitive area where we've seen numerous terror attacks. This is where we are standing right now. The first attack this afternoon in a building in the southern part of the city of Tel Aviv, outside a room that was used as a synagogue while people were praying. A Palestinian with a permit for staying in Israel, who was working in one of the restaurants in the area, stabbed 3 people. 2 of them got killed, and the third was wounded. The assailant was captured by security forces. And a couple of hours later, quite an unusual event, I must mention, during a traffic jam in this road, exactly leading to the junction of the Gush Etzion area, and you can see it right now. A Palestinian driver began shooting all over, and then continued driving with his car, and his vehicle got stuck in a different car. 7 people were hit. 3 of them got killed, and 4 others were wounded. This assailant as well was captured by security forces. And the 2 assailants of today's events are coming from the Hebron area. And tonight, the Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu held a security discussion with many officials from the military, the police, and the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Agency of Israel, about the situation in the Hebron area, where we've seen many of the attackers of the recent terror wave coming from, and also about the issue and ways of punishment for Israelis who employ or drive illegal Palestinian workers. So really a bloody day in Israel today. 2 different locations, one in the West Bank and one in the center of the country, and the terror is not going anywhere, as it seems from now.
Yes, Eli, what is the feeling of the people who are living in this settlement area, who are who are supposed to be the victims of these attacks. How do they feel today about the recent wave, or what is happening right now on the ground?
Well, as said, this area is a very sensitive area. We've seen here a huge number of attacks, and actually one of the victims of today's attack was an 18-year-old American boy who came here to visit the memorial site that was set in memory of the 3 Israeli teens that were kidnapped prior to Operation Protective Edge, and he came here to pay his condolences or tribute to those teens. So this area has experienced many terror attacks, and the tensions here are rising immediately when anything is happening in every single area in Israel. And it seems that as for now, neither the government nor the security forces has solutions for these problematic areas where we see Arab villages and Jewish settlements living side by side.
Yeah. This is the reality here. Eli Ochenberg, thank you very much for this. Mr. Nachshon, I want to ask you, here Amir Oren said that with the lack of diplomacy, you can put all the forces on the ground that you want. You can conduct security measures. You can, I'm sorry, Mr. Navon, I'm sorry. I was mistaken. But you can put whatever you want on the ground. You can put all the soldiers or security forces, but when you don't have on the other side also diplomacy, and when you don't have some kind of a peace plan or a path towards peace, it seems that these attacks will continue forward.
They will continue in both cases. Historically, it's a fact. I just want to remind you that the first stabbing that started about 3 months ago, most of the stabbers posted on their Facebook page before they committed their terrorist attacks what motivated them. None of them mentioned the lack of peace process or the lack of political horizon. They spoke in terms of religion, and they claimed that they were doing a religious act to revenge what they called the Al-Aqsa mosques on which the Jews were walking and with their dirty feet, etc., etc. Now, as Amir Oren himself just said, at the very height of the peace process in the past, there were terrorist attacks. Now, it doesn't mean that there should not be a peace process, but let us not fool ourselves about the connection between the two. And I also want to remind you, I think this morning there was in the Time of Israel an article in which Mahmoud Abbas admitted that he rejected the peace offer of Ehud Olmert in 2008, which included a complete withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza, a gesture on the refugees, the sharing of sovereignty over the Temple Mount. So, and it was rejected. So yeah, it would be preferable to have a peace process, but the fact that Israel made offers in the past that were very serious offers that were rejected systematically by the Palestinian leadership is a fact.
He mentioned that there was a reason for that. I mean, you cannot just ignore.
He mentioned the right of return. You're right.
No, not the right of return.
He did. He mentioned also the right of return. He said he has no right to forego the right of return for 5 million Palestinians. And as we know, the so-called right of return, which has absolutely no basis in international law, is incompatible with a two-state solution. He mentioned it in his interview yesterday. He also mentioned it in 2009 in his interview with Jackson Dale in the Washington Post. So he's saying it. I'm not saying it for him.
The problem was Olmert's right of return to the prime ministership, which was not on the table.
But, yes, I know that this is a theory. No, I'm sure, but the fact that he's saying himself that he did not reject the offer because Olmert was a lame duck, he's not saying it.
He said that it was because of a couple of reasons. First of all, more than anything else, is that they refused to give him the map, meaning that he needed to say yes for a map that he couldn't discuss.
But he had the figures, and the figures were, it was 5.8 of annexation and compensation in Israel. Basically, it was 99.5% of the West Bank with land swaps. And these figures...
5 days later, Olmert resigned.
Not 5 days later, because the first offer was in May 2008.
No, 16 of
but
September.
Again, you're trying to find excuses for...
He resigned.
Fine, but you're trying to find excuses where he himself is not using those excuses.
You want to answer?
Yeah, I can only add, this is not the reason, of course. We all understand that, if Abbas rejected or not rejected, this is not the reason for what we see today. I think that part of the reason is that there's no hope on the other side. There's complete despair on the other side. When you talk to the Palestinians, they understand that they have two ways, either to accept the occupation or to fight and to go and to kill Jews. Now, I'm not justifying anything, of course. But you cannot just ignore and say this is only because they want to kill Jews. The writing was on the wall for more than a year. People threatened, people said that this will come, and more than that, the security apparatus in Israel itself was the one that told the prime minister, that told the minister of defense, this is about to come, this is about to happen if we will not going to see some kind of a political horizon.
It might be futile to rehash even recent history. For the last 6 years, ever since Netanyahu came back into power, he stopped the Annapolis process, which went on during the Olmert and Tzipi Livni period. And then all the efforts were invested by the Obama administration in trying to restart the process. But having said that, only a week ago, the Israeli government prematurely was delighted to announce that the tactic of house demolition is apparently working, because someone told the authorities that his son perpetrated one of the murders, which, by the way, is unheard of for a security service to point at the source. And who knows what will happen to this father later. But it turns out that there is no deterrence. These two murderers this afternoon knew full well that their houses or their family houses could very well be demolished. It didn't deter them.
I just want to give the reaction from the Prime Minister's office today. In reaction to today's deadly terror attacks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once again reiterated that terror in Israel is no different than terror in Paris or elsewhere in the world. He described those unwilling to condemn attacks on Israelis as blind hypocrites. I wanted to ask, I'm trying to understand what is happening here. Just a few days ago, just 2 days ago, the foreign minister of Sweden just said what she said about trying to connect or not connecting between the terror attacks in Paris and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yet what we're seeing right now is that also the Prime Minister is connecting between the two. He's saying if you are condemning the terror attacks in Paris, you need to condemn also the terror attacks in the Palestinian, in Israel here, and what is being done to the Israelis. And I'm asking myself, so why Israel is angry on Sweden when it's doing the same thing and asking from the world to do the same thing?
Because he's not doing the same thing. I'm not here to defend the Prime Minister, but he's not doing the same thing. He's not making the same kind of connection. What the Swedish Foreign Minister was trying to say was to rationalize and even to justify those kind of terrorist attacks. Now, what we were saying before, it's lack of political horizons, desperation. Even in Europe, you hear those kind of voices. Why do you have people coming into into Paris, killing hundreds? Well, because of desperation. They must be upset about something. So as soon as you rationalize this completely irrational and hateful crimes, then there's always a reason. So you can rationalize, in the case of Israel, it's because there's no political horizon. And I'm not saying this in order to justify the lack of horizon, but also in Europe, some people say, well, it's because of colonialism in the past, it's because of what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians. In other words, they're also sometimes trying to rationalize it. And some say, no, it comes from an insane ideology, a certain interpretation of religion, and has nothing to do with this or that desperation from today or from yesterday.
I just want to join to this conversation. Peter Hume, freelance journalist in Paris, live from Paris. Peter, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. So what are the latest updates from you?
Well, the very latest update is that the French police and other security forces are continuing their sweep across France. There have been latest activities. They've staged several raids in Aulnay, which is yet another suburb of Paris, this time slightly more to the east from Saint-Denis, where the shootout occurred early yesterday morning. In the course of today's operation, they've arrested or holding for interrogation and questioning at least 70 more suspects. Now, this afternoon, shortly after 3 p.m. Paris time, the Interior Ministry did confirm that Abdelhamid Abaoud, who'd been considered to be the mastermind behind Friday night's bloody attacks here in Paris, was amongst those killed in that police raid at Saint-Denis to the north of Paris very early yesterday morning. He was identified by the use of fingerprints. The Interior Ministry says that they received some help from a non-European intelligence service, which we understand to be the Moroccan Secret Service, who are able to track Abaoud, who was, even though he was a Belgian citizen, his parents had emigrated from Morocco some 40 years ago. So the Moroccan intelligence services being of some help to the French. Otherwise, the security sweeps will continue. Tomorrow we will see the upper house of Parliament, the Senate, approving the state of emergency, extending that state of emergency for another 3 months towards the end of February. Now that allows the police a much freer hand to move around and to investigate, go into houses without a warrant, and also will potentially crack down on firebrand imams and any other associations that are believed to be anti-French, anti the Republic, and that would certainly potentially pose a threat to the public at large. So
Peter?
one other fact I think I want to mention, yes?
Yes, I just want to ask you, the fact that police officers will have on their body weapon, even in their free time, even when they are not in duty, what does it mean for the French people? Because this is, unprecedented. Seeing the French people maybe having the same normal life, let's say, like the Israelis, is a really big change of state of mind of the French people.
Yes, that's right. That's, as you mentioned, one of the provisions of the state of emergency would be now, in fact, that the police will be able to bring their weapons back home, I guess, once they're off duty, ready at a moment's notice to spring back into action if the need arises. Now, I think in Paris and throughout France, we're going to see a certain curtailment of the kind of liberties or the amount of freedom of movement. There will be more checks that that Parisians are going to have to, and French people at large are probably going to have to sacrifice a little bit of their traditional freedoms. But I think the government's moves are fully supported by the public at large. No one here, I think, wants to see, obviously, any kind of repetition. And the focus now is on making sure that doesn't happen again. And I think the French are going to accept whatever measures will be introduced, as and they look as if they're going to be fairly tough measures.
Yes, Peter Hume, thank you very much for this update from you. Benjamin Netanyahu is calling hypocrisy someone who is ignoring what happened in Paris and what is happening here in Israel. And I'm asking, isn't it naive from Israel to actually ask the people in Europe to try and condemn what is happening in Israel, or try to start understanding what is happening in Israel with the Palestinians?
Well, terrorism is just a method. Terrorism is not the thing in itself. The Daesh people, as well as Palestinians and others, use terror when they don't have other means. If Daesh has rockets or if it has chemical weapons, they will use those too. And the question is, what is the political motive behind the terror acts? With Daesh, there is no compromise. There is no plan, there is no national goal that you can talk about and perhaps reach a compromise if there is common ground. With the Palestinians, there could be, some of the Palestinians, there could be a compromise. With Hamas, for instance, there is no possibility of reaching a grand compromise, only a sort of a hudna, of an armistice, because their declared aim is to have a Muslim state instead of the state of Israel.
But in this specific issue, Avi, I want to ask you, when Israel is sending double messages to the people in Israel, or maybe to the Palestinians, from 1 year after Operation Protective Edge, Israel, we're hearing some reports saying that Israel is conducting some kind of talks with Hamas. The Palestinians who are seeing this in the West Bank are saying, well, maybe Israel understands only power, because if they fired rockets at Israel, and Israel is actually 1 year after sitting down with them and trying to get some understanding, what are we getting from this, the people in the West Bank?
The answer is nothing. I mean, Palestinians in the West Bank, especially when we are talking about the Palestinian Authority, is getting nothing from the Israeli side. There was some talks, there was some gestures. the population lives in a better conditions than the Gazans ones. But at the end of the day, I think that we saw it. We saw it coming, and I think that I was here so many times saying it. If you would hear the Shin Bet officers, if you would hear the intelligence officers, they were all saying that again and again and again. It's going to happen, it's going to come. For the government, it was pretty convenient to ignore everything. And now it seems that the government is completely stuck upon, look, the terrorism, we cannot do anything. Now, when there's no terrorism, say, why to hurry? What's the rush? We need to wait and to see what will happen in the Middle East. So we're kind of a dead-end situation. And when I look at the horizon, when I look at the future, there's only black over there. There's nothing positive. There's no horizon. There's no some kind of a solution or strategic thought in the Israeli side about what should we do about this terrorism. Look, then again, today in Hebron, I must say, I saw more soldiers than Palestinians. I saw so many soldiers, and still we see that there are some attacks. So what is the solution here?
I don't disagree on the fact that it would be preferable to have a horizon. But the problem is, you talked about a dead-end situation. I would more describe it as a catch-22 situation because, again, what is Israel supposed to do? I mean, renew the negotiations again that have been going on for like 22 years with the PLO, with Hamas, put on the table again the proposal that Ehud Olmert. All I'm saying is that it's not that there have not been negotiations in the past, and it's not that they haven't led to a dead end. So I'm saying, yes, it would be preferable. But what do you suggest? I mean, that's the real question. It is a catch-22 situation. By the way, Israel also tried the unilateral move in Gaza because it was despairing of the Palestinian leadership. And that's why also Sharon said, you know what, we'll just pull out, throw the keys, and we saw the results. So that's why I'm talking about a catch-22 situation. It's a very complex situation. And just saying, oh, well, you know, you should do something and there should be a horizon, it's easy to say, but it's much harder to do.
Yeah, just what is your reaction about Israel being naive, maybe, about asking from Europe to understand it?
Look, I don't expect anything from anybody. You know, I believe in the word realpolitik, and I don't expect the Europeans to behave any other way. So I think that each country behaves according to their interests and not according to their feelings. And I personally don't expect anything from the Europeans.
Yes, just before we're continuing, the alleged mastermind of the Paris terror attacks, Abdelhamid Abaoud, is dead, killed by French special forces during yesterday's police raid in the Saint-Denis suburb. The revelation comes as France's prime minister warned that the Islamic State could use chemical or biological weapon against the country. I-24 News correspondent Ur Shapira recaps the day's events.
A day after French police raided the Paris suburb of Saint-Denis, authorities now confirm the mastermind of Friday's Paris attacks is dead.
The French prosecutor has just confirmed that we now know that Abaoud, the mastermind of the attacks, or one of the masterminds, I should say, as we should remain prudent until we know the extent of the threat, was found amongst those who were killed.
De renseignement et de la police.
20-year-old Abdelhamid Abaoud was accused of orchestrating Friday's deadly carnage, which took the lives of 129 people. Authorities originally thought he was in Syria, but the investigation led them to the Paris suburb of Saint-Denis, and police stormed the building Wednesday. Another woman terrorist blew herself up in the raid, and 8 other people were arrested.
Among the 6 attacks that were avoided or foiled by French intelligence services since spring 2015, Abaoud was implicated in 4 of them.
In the aftermath of the attacks and raids, the French parliament is taking further steps against terror. The French lower house extended Thursday for 3 more months the state of emergency imposed by French President François Hollande immediately after Friday's attacks. Meanwhile, Belgian police launched a new wave of anti-terror raids. At least 9 people were arrested Thursday in Brussels. The country's prosecutors said that the raids targeted places linked to Bilal Hadfi, one of the attackers.
We're dealing with a very serious, well-resourced, determined international terrorist organization that is now active on the streets of Europe. Reasonable to assume, therefore, without any recourse to exaggeration, that further attacks are likely.
Parisians welcomed the measures taken by the authorities in the killing of Abaoud, but judging from the extreme reactions coming from the public and the government, it seems that it will take time to bring life in France back to normal.
Amir.
One of the most important objects in and off this investigation is this small object which the three of you have, the cell phone. Now, obviously, people know that they can be under surveillance when they use cell phones. This is not new, and therefore the terrorists change phones, which is why it's difficult to foil the attack. But once it is found, there is a wealth of information in it. It's like a treasure island for investigators, because they can recreate through the GPS movements of the phones where they have been. They can not only the route, but whom they met and what they bought: airline tickets, rail tickets. Everything you do through the phone is gold for the investigators, which is why relatively quickly after the fact they were able to see who the inner circle around the terrorists was. Now they are going to the outer circle, and there will be more revelations.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me in this part. France framed the Paris attacks as the Paris attacks as a declaration of war by the Islamic State. The government has reacted in kind, launching airstrikes in Syria and declaring a 3-month state of emergency. For many observers, what is going on in the country mimics the U.S. reaction following 9/11. Ayman Siksik examines the parallels.
Killers have no limits. These were the words Prime Minister Manuel Valls put to the French Parliament Thursday as representatives prepared to vote on a controversial security measure. Just this week, security forces found a weapons cache in the city of Lyon that includes rifles and a rocket launcher, leading the French Prime Minister to claim that the next attack on France could be exponentially worse.
We can't exclude anything today, and I say this with all the precaution it calls for, but we know it. We have it in mind. There can be the risk of chemical and biological weapons.
To counter the threat, France is proposing an extension of its state of emergency, imposed after 129 people were killed Friday in a series of attacks by Islamic State. The plan, which entails increased security measures within France, is drawing comparisons to the United States' highly contested Patriot Act. In the wake of the September 11 terror attacks in 2001, the Bush administration introduced monitoring systems which allowed the government access to phone records and internet activities. The extent of the surveillance saw senior National Security Agency officials ousted from their positions. But is France also headed for a Patriot Act-style saga? For the Prime Minister of Belgium, the country from which the alleged mastermind of the Paris attacks operated, criticism of security services is, quote, unacceptable, and large-scale intelligence efforts are already underway.
A supplementary budget of 400 million euros has been put in place in 2016's budget to reinforce the capability of security services to fight against terrorism.
But security and surveillance operations are rarely restricted to the borders of one country. France, too, was on the opposite side of a surveillance effort when news broke that Germany had spied on the French Foreign Affairs Minister Laurent Fabius. Standing next to German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Fabius said that spying is not something that friends do.
It's never nice to know that someone is spying on you. It is something friends shouldn't do to each other, that's for sure.
Since France made these remarks last week, it has launched an intense air campaign against the IS in Syria. The strikes see the French government strangely aligned with Russia, currently the most significant power acting militarily in the country. With the US reducing its involvement in the region after 9/11 saw it involved in 2 wars in the Middle East, France is likely headed to an intense military involvement after the Paris attacks. Hollande will meet separately with US President Barack Obama and later travel to Moscow to discuss a large-scale coalition against the IS. Taken aback by the surveillance effort of its German neighbor, it seems France could soon be making an unlikely new friend.
Yes, and with me in this part is Danny Ayalon, former Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And also Ali Waqid, I-24 News, Senior Middle East Analyst. Good evening.
Lucy.
So let's start with the security measures that France decided to take today. And if and what do you think about it? And if you think that maybe these security measures can actually change the face of diplomacy, the face of democracy in France?
Well, first of all, I don't think it will change too much about security because there is no full proof. You talked about it in Hebron, so many Israeli military, and still, you know, if there is determination, if there is a suicide bomber, he can infiltrate in many cases. I think you were right, what you suggested, that it may put Europe in a big, big rift between those who are the liberals, who believe in, you know, all the rights, civil rights, human rights, égalité, fraternité, liberté, and all this, and the right, extreme right. And I believe at the end of the day, we will see internal, of course, conflict in the countries, but also in between countries. You have countries like Hungary, like the Czech Republic, like Poland, who want to, or certainly Croatia and Serbia, which are not yet members, but certainly they want to restrict freedoms and also close the borders. And then you have other countries like Sweden, and so I think it can be internal conflict in countries, but also it could be a conflict that may even break the European Union.
You know, we try to understand, maybe we do understand what France is going through in the last few days. And we are seeing here some kind of a proof in the Israeli society what happens when terror is taking over, what happens to the Israeli society when terror is taking over, how divided the society is. And I'm asking myself how the free, democratic, the after French Revolution country will handle this with millions of refugees, millions of migrants, second, third generation of people who feel frustrated with their country. What will happen to them when these security measures will start maybe taking the place of diplomatic and democratic measures?
Lucy, I disagree with the comparison between Israel and France, Israel and Europe, because in Israel the society is divided regarding occupation, regarding some terror attacks made here or there, because there is the occupation, and the Israeli society is divided regarding the occupation and whether some attacks, some measures taken by the Palestinian can or cannot justify. In France, in Europe, this is pure and typical terrorism according to the very basic definition of terrorism in the political sciences.
I wasn't talking about even the Israelis and the Palestinians. I was talking about the Israeli society itself. We are seeing the division here and the gaps here in Israel between the Israeli Jewish community and the Israeli Arab community, and what happens in waves of terror, what happens after an intifada, what happens after an operation in the Gaza Strip, because at the end of the day, these two societies are just, the gap between them starts getting bigger and bigger.
In France, the division between those who were for the migration and those who were against the migration started before these attacks. The division will be deepened and accelerated, the discussion, after the attacks. It is sure, but I don't think it started Saturday morning after the attacks. We know Marine Le Pen, before these incidents, were leading in the polls for the regional internal elections in next month in France, and according to the polls, it's yet early, but according to the polls, she is at the head of the candidates for the presidential in 2017, and Marine Le Pen is focusing over the French nature and over migration. So these were two very sensible issues in the French society.
What will happen when people will start being labeled like Muslims in France, like migrants in France, like when right now with the security measures, police can get in, just arrest whomever it wants, and let's face the truth, they won't arrest, for example, Catholics, or they won't arrest any maybe Jewish community. They will arrest Muslims in mosques and poor neighborhoods, and that will start happening in the French society.
I will say two things. First of all, when we saw the clashes that happened near the in Saint-Denis with the apartment in which the French found the second cell, I felt that we are seeing images from Jenin that we remember of the Intifada. This is one thing, but very quickly, once the French will take full control over the situation, people will forget this as they forgot Charlie Hebdo. They remember Charlie Hebdo just Saturday morning, Lucy. I do believe that this time maybe the discussion will go, but the measures that President Hollande did not convoke the two chambers of the French Parliament and ask in front of the whole world his Prime Minister and his government to take unprecedented measures in the field of security, even if some of the measures will be on behalf of some of the liberties and rights that Ambassador and Ayalon talked about. But I don't think that it will affect deeply the French society. And regarding the division, I think that the Arab community in France was almost united in condemning these attacks, despite their criticism about the lack of integration of some of the youth categories, youth groups in Arab youth groups, migrant youth groups in the French society.
I want to take you after 9/11. What we saw after 9/11 with the Americans was a state of shock in the first few months. The United States couldn't believe that something like that in this magnitude can happen on the soil of the United States. Afterwards, we saw the United States going crazy, dividing the world to good and evil. After that, we saw the Patriot Law. After that, we saw the United States going into forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, in each and every place in the Middle East to try and get the payback that they want. And I'm asking, you cannot compare the magnitude of these two incidents of September 11 and what just happened last Friday in France. But can you compare what will happen between what France is doing right now and what the United States did just at September 11?
Well, you're right. You know, remember before 9/11, for the Americans, as a national trauma was only Pearl Harbor. So they compared 9/11 to Pearl Harbor. Now they compare the attack in Paris to 9/11. So this is the new reference point. And you're right. In terms of 9/11, the Americans went all out. Patriot Act inside, going out after Al-Qaeda first in Afghanistan, boots on the ground, if you remember. And at the end of the day, they found Osama bin Laden, and they even drowned his body in the ocean so nobody will know where it is and nobody will build a shrine of people, of followers. France is not capable to do what the United States did, and also France, you know, it's a second-tier power. Only if NATO, with United States troops, will come together, they will do it. But I don't see any appetite, you know, and I can understand it. There is no sense to put NATO troops, even Russian troops, let's say Christian troops, in between Muslim fighters. If you ask me, of course, France will do what they have to do publicly, you know. So we heard the Charles de Gaulle,
Can they have the do they have the forces that the United States have? Do they have the capability to actually, although he went in with warships, although he is going to speak with Vladimir Putin, like you're saying, he needs the NATO forces actually to combine all the forces and do this together. It seems that he wants to go into a war that maybe he cannot handle.
No, but I think mostly we hear the rhetorics because he knows, although elections is 2 hour, 1.5 years away, but he knows already that Sarkozy is waiting in line, Marine Le Pen, of course, even more so. So he has to show the French public, you know, that they should have the trust, they should have the confidence, and they should feel good about it. But if there was any attempt in the international community to solve the issues in the war in Iraq and Syria, the only thing is to put a pan-Islamic or pan-Arabic peacekeeping force. I think this would be, and the United States, NATO, they can supply material, they can supply other things, you know, logistics, but on the ground, I think you will have to have Arabs or Muslims, which hopefully will have the respect of the local population, and I think they are the ones who would naturally take care of things and bring things to a halt.
Lucy, I want to add one detail that it seems easy to ask the question about where are the boots on the ground, but we don't have today one center of tension and of military escalation, of security escalation, that is Syria. What about Iraq? What about Yemen? What about Libya? and Libya, we should remember this name. And what about Nigeria and Boko Haram? There are many places, and I don't think that 50,000 boots on the ground, Western boots on the ground in Syria will solve the problem. The problem is not reduced to Syria on one hand, and it's not reduced to the security echelon. It's not reduced to the security issues. There are an ideological attraction that we talked about for the youth Muslim in Europe, and not only in Europe. And you cannot deal with this ideological attraction with the boots on the ground. When you see I talked with Jordanian colleagues days after the burning of the Jordanian pilot. There was a very strong feeling against the Islamic State in Jordan. Now I can tell you the sympathy to the Islamic State, to ISIS in Jordan, got back almost to its same level before the burning incident of the Jordanian pilot.
Where is Jordan, by the way? Where is Jordan with the warplanes when they went and started bombing IS targets? Where are they?
Because at that moment, and maybe Ambassador Alon will correct, until the last days when Russians and French started striking the Islamic State, I don't believe that the international community really targeted the Islamic State and the infrastructure of the Islamic State. How come we know that oil is 80% of the incomes of the Islamic State, and only in the last weeks, oil infrastructure in the territories occupied by the Islamic State were targeted? This is a question to raise about the priorities of the international community, and I'm afraid because of the calculation to try to meet the Saudi policy, the international community focused over Bashar Assad and not over the Islamic State. Otherwise, how come when 50 countries and international coalition is striking the Islamic State, and the Islamic State had all the time in the world to prepare the Paris attacks, to be in the loop of the attack against the Russian and the Lebanese terror attacks in Beirut. It is to be asked, what was the priority of the international community, and why the international community, despite more than 1 year of operation, allowed the Islamic State to become the monster that we are now meeting.
So we've been spoken a little bit about the threat to the U.S., including a new Islamic State video warning of attacks in New York and in Washington. ABC News has more on the precautionary measures being implemented there.
As the Rockettes opened their famed Christmas shows, and the holiday window displays went up at the big department stores, the city's mayor and police commissioner hastily called reporters to Times Square late last night to say there was nothing to fear from ISIS.
Be aware, but do not be afraid. The NYPD will protect you.
It was all a reaction to less than 20 seconds of scenes in a newly released ISIS video that showed a suicide bomber intercut with New York's Times Square. Scenes that had appeared in previous ISIS videos and went largely unnoticed. But having made good on its threats to attack Paris, every ISIS video now is given close scrutiny by law enforcement everywhere. And now ISIS is showing off the bomb it says brought down that Russian passenger jet. A misleadingly simple device with components costing no more than $50. A Schweppes soda can packed with explosives, a tiny detonator with a blasting cap, and a switch and a timer to set it off.
Close the switch and arm the timer to start its countdown, and boom.
Bomb experts say it could produce a blast much more powerful than the one in this government test. The Russian jet blew up 22 minutes after takeoff. Based on the location of the wreckage, U.S. authorities believe the bomb was likely placed in the rear luggage hold of the plane by an ISIS infiltrator. In its online post, ISIS boasted it smuggled the bomb onto the Russian jet after it discovered a way to compromise the security at the Sharm el-Sheikh airport in Egypt. And in a grisly footnote, ISIS even produced passports of some of the Russian victims, somehow retrieved by ISIS at the scene of the crash.
Yes, and in the midst of all this, Israel is saying that it wants Europe now to understand its position and concerning what is happening here in Israel. And I'm asking myself, when the Europeans are so occupied with terror attacks, when the Europeans are so occupied with what is happening in the Middle East, in other places, like what Ali's saying, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, they will really be occupied with what is happening right now in Israel, when Israel and the Palestinians certainly have no chance of coming back to the negotiation table whatsoever.
Right. Unfortunately, yes, of course, there is no preoccupation whatsoever with the Middle East now in Europe, and in light, of course, of what's happening, and of course, all the threats that are still imminent. And we see that, and there is no doubt, there was a major, Ali Waqed asked before, where were the priorities of the international community? How come they let ISIS become such an effective power, terror organization that can penetrate so well? And I think we see also a lack of, not just a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of orientation, because the French had the intelligence. They had some of the terrorists already in their custody, and they released them. And of course, after the attack, you see how the French police act. It's not very professional, when they were going all over. So they will learn, but certainly I don't think anybody now thinks about anything else but themselves. The United States thinks about how to protect the mainland, the United States, the Europeans about Europe, and right now, nothing will go beyond that.
But I want to ask Ambassador Ayalon that the Israelis were really upset with the statements of the foreign Swedish minister. Yeah. And I think that it reflects some of the European feelings that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remain a major reason to the tension in the region, despite of what we're seeing of ISIS atrocities and what is going on in Syria and in Iraq. Many European elites still believe that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had some impact over what is going on in the world, including the region we just mentioned.
Do you really think, I'm just sorry for jumping in, but do you really think that there is some kind of connection between what is happening right now with ISIS to the Israel? I think that even the
ISIS was talking
Palestinians...
about the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the fact that Jews were proliferating the mosque, and they promised to strike Israel, etc., etc., etc. And I think that there is no direct connection, but we cannot also totally disconnect what is happening, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to the radicalization process.
To the radicalization process, but do you think really that the Palestinians want to be compared to Daesh, to the Daesh ideology, to what they think? I find it very hard to believe that.
I'm not saying this. I'm saying that if you try to see what are the components that push young Muslims to radicalization, you will see them. If you interview them, they will, I don't know, at the 3rd or 4th or 10th place, they will mention Jerusalem, they will mention Al-Aqsa, and they will mention the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Well, I would say, first of all, to Ali's comment, you're right. And the elite in Europe, the intellectual elite, certainly would like to find some links, some connections, as we heard in Sweden, by the way, in Ireland as well. But I think this is diminishing, and this is going into the fringe. You see, it's in the countries like Ireland and Sweden. But if you look at the main countries today, whether the governments at least, France, of Italy, of Britain, not to talk about the Eastern European, the Polish, Hungarian, and all that, they make the separation. And I think that you are right, Lucy. I don't think that the Palestinians benefit from any association between ISIS and the terror here. And at the end of the day, if ISIS, even in 9/11 also, Al-Qaeda also, in the list of why they did it, listed, well, because the U.S. is a friend of Israel. But this backfires because this puts the Americans or the Europeans on the defense, and they will go out of their way to show that this is not the case. So at the end of the day, I would say that I don't think that the Palestinian cause is benefiting from this. First of all,
even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a card anymore to the Arab world or to the Europeans.
Right. First of all, the attention now is elsewhere, not on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And secondly, from a moral point of view, once there is the connection. And Israel, I don't think Israel, to your question, I don't think Israel should raise this link between ISIS and the Palestinians, but the Europeans will do it themselves if this continues. And God forbid, if there is another attack, you know.
I mean, the stabbing attacks in Israel.
Well, also, right, but, we forget Madrid. In Madrid, 2004, 200 people were killed.
Yeah,
it was an initial shock, but who talks about it now?
I want to continue talking about the Israeli-European connection. Ali Waqt, thank you very much for this, because Danny, I know you're staying with me for another part. We're going back to Israel, and Eli Ochenberg is standing with us in Gush Etzion, live from there. Eli, there is another story between Europe and Israel, of course, like let's say that is providing some kind of a scene, a different scene about maybe part of the things that the Prime Minister is saying today.
Yes, Lucy, in a day when Europe is still recovering from the massive terror attack in Paris last Friday, weighing its security options, and Israel is still struggling with its own complex security situation, one would think that the common ground between the two will be at the center of attention. But the Israeli-Europe relations the already shaky relations received a major blow in recent weeks due to the EU's decision to label a product made in Israeli settlements in the West Bank and the Golan Heights. And only yesterday, the Israeli Foreign Ministry released a series of retaliatory measures, if you will, among them reassessing Europe's involvement in the peace process, cause they care dearly about. But now we hear another report of Israel trying to step up its fight against Europe, maybe thinking about suing the EU for its latest move. More in the following report.
The labeling of products of the Jewish state by the European Union brings back dark memories. Europe should be ashamed of itself. It took an immoral decision.
It's important to keep a sense of proportion and not to confuse facts with fiction. Talks of a European boycott just does not stand up to a reality check.
One side calls for a reality check, the other for checking reality. The spat between Israel and the EU is moving towards the next level. The controversial European decision to label products made in Jewish settlement triggered a massive uproar in Jerusalem, and the Israeli government quickly began weighing its potential methods of response. The leading idea at the moment, according to the Israeli daily Haaretz, promoted by Strategic Affairs Minister Gilad Erdan and Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, suing the EU under the claim that labeling goods is a breach of the World Trade Organization's policies. Other legal options are also being examined. But this idea is not that welcome at the Foreign Ministry. Officials were quoted as saying it could only lead to a further deterioration in relations between Jerusalem and Brussels, and might also encourage counter moves by Arab states who could demand a total boycott of the products in question rather than just sticking labels on them. In the meantime, the EU continues to stress that the labeling decision should not be raising such a racket.
Let me say this loud and clear. Europe is not boycotting Israel, and Europe is not boycotting settlements. Products from settlements will continue to enter the EU market. We oppose boycotts and BDS.
But on the Israeli side, this move is touching the wrong nerves, especially among right-wing circles.
Given this harsh reality, we need to think about changing the way that we treat and relate towards Europe. We have to look at Europe the same way, more or less, that the United States looks at China. That is, they are our trading partner, we share some common interests with them, but overall, we're rivals.
Could this be the end of the Europe-Israel relations as we know it? Could Israel afford to lose such a strategic ally? And will Europe risk the good ties with its #1 exporter, and by accident also the only democracy in the Middle East? And even if the sides will eventually work out their disagreements, one question still has to be answered. How long will the grudge and distrust remain?
And we will continue from one report from Eli Ochenberg to another one to look deeper into this issue and others. Eli Ochenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, had the opportunity to sit down with the UN's Special Envoy to the Middle East, Nikolai Mladenov. Here is an excerpt of the interview.
Mr. Mladenov, thank you very much for being here today. Yesterday, we've seen the EU approving the labeling of products made in Israeli settlements, which triggered yet again the debate over Israel's image worldwide. Do you agree with the claims that Israel is being overjudged or unfairly judged by the international community, the UN included?
I think what the European Union did is part of what the policy in terms of consumer protection in Europe is, that people need to know the origins of the goods that they're buying. I understand that this has been taken very emotionally here in Israel, but I hope people will focus on what the real issue is. And the real issue today should be, what is it actually that the government, the Palestinian Authority, the people of Israel, the Palestinians can do to restart a political process that brings life back to the idea that you can have two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. And we should not get distracted by other issues, because this remains the fundamental goal of everybody in the international community, and I think from the majority of people, both Israelis and Palestinians.
Yes, we also hear rising voices claiming the UN has somewhat lost its relevance or amount of influence generally, and especially when it comes to Middle Eastern affairs. What role do you think you can play in reestablishing the UN's position here?
Well, I think with the role, we have a multitude of hats here in this region. And one hat, we work very closely with the Palestinian Authority on the entire developmental agenda, which has, over the last few years, taken a bit of a hit because of the lack of political progress. But we also play a very key role in mobilizing the international efforts to support a peace architecture that is necessary to bring the two sides together. And right now, that means that we, together with our partners in the United States, the Russians, the European Union, must advance the goal of seeing what it is that needs to change in terms of Israel's policies in the West Bank. How can we advance Palestinian unity so that both sides are in a better position to have meaningful negotiations about a two-state solution? Unfortunately, the reality that we face today is pretty grim. It is not just the security situation, which has deteriorated over the last few weeks, but it is the consistent lack of political progress and lack of political horizon that has angered many people, and that makes many people very skeptical as to whether a two-state solution is possible, particularly in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Well, we'll go back to this issue shortly, but do you intend to promote your predecessor's initiative, Robert Terry's initiative, to reach a truce between Israel and Hamas? Is this something on the agenda?
No, this is not on the agenda. What is on the agenda is our work with the Palestinian Authority in supporting their efforts to return back to a single government, if you wish, both in the occupied West Bank and in Gaza. I think that's in the interest of everybody. What we're trying to find is how to best support the reconstruction of Gaza, because the situation there is really, really desperate for people. They are stuck in between, a hammer and a hard place. They suffer because of the closures that have been imposed on Gaza, but they also suffer because of the limitations that have been put in place by Hamas. And we need to be able to return the legitimate Palestinian Authority to control the crossings into Gaza, because that would allow for more openings to happen, both on the Israeli and the Egyptian side, of course. But we also, for that, need to find a way of paying the salaries of about 40,000 civil servants in Gaza, civilian civil servants, most of them doctors and teachers, who have not been paid for over a year. So that is a whole package of our work that we have to continue focusing on. I believe very much that one of the most important tasks ahead of us will be to support the efforts of reconciliation and unity among the various Palestinian factions that are in the interest of peace on the Palestinian side, just as much as our work with the Israeli authorities and our international partners on making sure that we can find a meaningful way to return to to negotiations.
Well, another common allegation towards the UN, besides Israeli claims, is that the UN somewhat shuts its eyes when comfortable, whether it's in regards to terror or human rights, with the recent example of Saudi Arabia being elected to chair the Human Rights Council. Do you understand such concerns that are rising towards the UN?
I find it fascinating how both Israelis and Palestinians alike love bashing the United Nations when it suits them and love praising it when it suits them. So we're quite used to that criticism. But the United Nations is a system that has different bodies. So what happens in the UN Human Rights Council, what happens in the Security Council, what happens in the General Assembly is the result of votes and of decisions that are taken by member states. I represent the Secretary General, and as such, I can assure you that our work here is very much focused on supporting peace, on supporting the resumption of meaningful negotiations between the two parties, and being fair on the basis of the guidelines that we have from the Security Council and from the various bodies within the United Nations. So sometimes, when necessary, we will speak against terrorism, but we will also speak when we see wrongs being done that inhibit the road to peace. For example, one of our consistent positions has been and continues to be that the expansion of settlements in the West Bank is an obstacle to peace. It doesn't help achieve peace. It doesn't help achieve a two-state solution. And most worryingly, over the last few weeks, it has increasingly become the cause of friction and anger with Palestinians because of the violence that has scaled up in relation to settlement expansion. So we will speak both against that, but we will also speak very clearly against terrorism when that is necessary, because nobody should live in fear. It doesn't matter if you're Israeli, if you're Palestinian, if you're European or American. Nobody should fear to take a bus ride, take their children to school, and that is something that we take a very, very firm view on.
Before you leave, briefly, after a few hectic, busy months in the job, is there room for optimism in the Middle East, in your opinion?
There is always room for optimism. And I think what we need to really dig deep down inside to find that optimism right now. But our job in the international community, in the United Nations, is not to give up hope, but to work with all parties to create hope. And today, the way we see this hope re-emerging is by pursuing a strategy that creates the conditions under which both parties find it meaningful to return back to a negotiated political process. Effectively, that means strengthening the unity within the Palestinian political movement, the Palestinian political establishment, but it also means substantial policy changes by Israel in how things are done on the ground. Policy changes that are consistent with the idea that at the end of this process, at the end of this road, there is a two-state solution. The government, the Prime Minister, has repeatedly reaffirmed his commitment to this perspective. We now need to see the actions that actually show that these policies are backed by, these words are backed by policies.
Mr. Nicola Mladenov, the UN envoy to the Middle East, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and we're staying here in Israel after 30 years. An American prison, former Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard is set to be freed tomorrow. A former U.S. Navy analyst, he was sentenced to life in prison for passing classified information to Israel. The issue has strained relations between Jerusalem and Washington, and the Israeli government remains unhappy as Pollard's parole terms dictate that he stays in the United States for 5 years. And I'm here, joining me also is Dr. Hani Zubaydah, political science at the Israel Valley Academic College. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And still with me, Dani Ayalon. Thank you very much for staying. And I want to talk with you a little bit about one saying that the education minister gave 2 days ago. And the education minister gave 2 days ago a saying about the Palestinians and about the fact that you should not give hope to the Palestinians, but you should give them more despair. And you should despair these people. Yes, it was 2 days ago in a convention. We're talking about Naftali Bennett, the education minister,
the
that
guy
gave.
who thinks math is the most important thing on earth right
Yes,
now.
yes.
Okay.
He
No,
said
just
that
making sure.
you need to make the Palestinians despair that they have, make it bigger. And this what will make them learn that they cannot hurt more Israelis. And I asked myself, when the education minister is saying that the other side should not be given hope, what is happening here? When this is the message coming out from the government, what is happening here? Because basically, how can Israel come to the EU, come to the United States, and ask that it will be that they will understand Israel?
Well, I hope that he will come with a correction to say that his things were taken out of context, because I would say, yes, you should give no hope to the terrorists. Palestinian terrorists should have no hope. No terrorist should have any hope. But the Palestinians, as a people, as a society, of course you have to give them hope. I mean, they are our neighbors, whether we want it or not. We are their neighbors, whether they want it or not. Hopefully, at some point, we'll find leadership that can find the bridge for peaceful coexistence.
Well, I haven't heard him 2 days ago. I must admit, it seems odd that he would say that. Well, I know today he said something that might be on the same link. Today he decided that each and every Israeli, probably Jewish, student in high school and middle school will have to visit Jerusalem and some meaningful places, as he said, significant places to Zionism and Judaism, at least 3 times a year. He was baffled by the fact that they visit Jerusalem only once a year, which okay.
Maybe he meant Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot.
Yeah, the three major holidays of Israel. Yeah, but as a whole, this say from a politician who is striving for the premier position is very problematic.
It's very problematic or very popular among Israelis?
No, it's very problematic. I do not believe, even if we look at Benjamin Netanyahu, who is kind of like moving between positions, he's very, very careful not to say such things. I'm not talking about, these are not extreme things, but these are very troublesome things. When you say, let's not give hope to the entire Palestinian population, and I really do hope,
he said
just
that
like
concerning the wave of attacks. He said that concerning that these people should not be given any hope. We should make them suffer so they won't think of doing things like that in the future. But when you're talking about these people, you're talking about Palestinians or potential terrorists in the future, so they won't think of committing any suicide attacks or whatever.
The only way to prevent them from making these attacks or becoming part of the attacks is by giving them hope. Because if they will have hope, eventually they will understand that if they take part in these attacks, they might come out dead from these attacks. Hence, hope will be the only thing that will prevent them from participating in these attacks. By the way, the head of the Israeli Shin Bet and the head of the Israeli military intelligence have said that out loud plainly. They said the only reason we're seeing these attacks is not nationalistic, it's not the problem of Israeli-Palestine, it's the problem of zero hope among Palestinians. And they said the only way to stop these attacks at this moment, as we see it, is giving hope to the Palestinians that something is going to change, that we might see a breakthrough.
But you are seeing today that the Prime Minister today is making the connection between what happened in Israel and what is happening in Paris and Europe. And basically, from what he said today, is that at the end of the day, Israel won't go easy on anyone who is going to commit terror. Israel is going to demolish houses, is going to make arrests. Israel is going to have hard measures against whomever is thinking to hurt it. So, you know,
I can understand and accept that. then there comes the problem of the Sweden foreign minister, who said exactly the same. Just like Benjamin Netanyahu, and he completely went against whatever she said. But the thing is, I can accept what the prime minister is saying. If somebody's coming to kill other people in this country, which is sovereign, there must be some kind of repercussion against these people who perpetrate murder or attempts of murder. But on the other hand, the general Palestinian population, oh no, I would like to separate these two entities. If you come here in an attempt to kill someone, you will be punished severely. But if you're doing everything according to the right or the way that should be done, I want to give you not just hope, I want to give you work, I want to give you money, I want to give you education, I want to give you infrastructure, I want to give you everything in order to sustain you on the side that wants to have peace.
So I want to jump to this conversation. Our correspondent, Peter Yumi, right now he is staying in Paris. And I want you, Peter, to tell us today from what you saw, from what you heard. Do you think that Parisians are getting back to normal? And do you think that maybe the minorities in France are starting to feel more targeted, or they are feeling more French today than ever?
Well, I think there's no question there remains an undercurrent of nervousness. I think we can best describe it as, I mean, just behind me here in the Place de la République, which is a central, very large square, used for public gatherings in happier days, also for demonstrations in days gone by. As you can see behind me, there's maybe a couple of hundred people here that are gathered to pay their respects. This has become a sort of a makeshift shrine, the central shrine to the victims and all of those that are still recovering in hospital from last Friday's bloody attacks. So there is a certain amount of nervousness, but there is also a determination to continue living in Paris as Parisians as far as possible. There's been some sort of public events that have been staged, fairly low key, but nevertheless that, using the social media to try and get people to, since the weather is, well, today it's actually a bit raining, but up until today, the weather's been unseasonably warm for November, and encouraging people to go out and have their meals on the terrace, on the terraces of all the many restaurants around town, and not to be intimidated by what happened on Friday. But it's a tough situation. People are still going to be somewhat nervous. All public demonstrations have been, for the time being, have been cancelled, if not they're all postponed. And there's as I said earlier, I think there's an undercurrent of nervousness, which the authorities are trying their best to do. I mean, they're continuing to sweep and raid areas in and around not just Paris, but some of the major cities. Just today, they've been focusing on a suburb called Aulnay, which is where the mother of the female suicide bomber that blew herself up in Saint-Denis early yesterday morning. She and other family members have been questioned in that suburb. And so it's a show of force, and it's a very public show of force. So all these actions that the government has taken, including extending the state of emergency by another 3 months through to the end of February, this is a communication to the people of Paris and to France to say, oh, look,
yes.
We're taking the action that we think is going to help end this particular period of crisis as soon as possible, as soon as they think that the crisis will peter out, I guess, at some point, although the threat will always remain.
Yes, Peter Yumi, thank you very much for this update for us. I want to get back, just showed you the quote from Naftali Bennett about the hope that we're keeping and we're giving people. I will just share this with the viewers. Naftali Bennett in a convention saying, the education minister of Israel, saying that terror is not happening because the Palestinians lost hope. It's because they have hope. The Palestinian state is their hope. It's an essential part in their plan, and if we will stop the hope for this plan, the motivation for terror will go down. This is problematic coming from somebody who is in Benjamin Netanyahu's government and saying this out loud. You won't have any Palestinian state.
Well, right. Reading this quote, so he would say, yes, I'm not against all Palestinians, but I want to crush their hope for inheriting the state of Israel. This is what he will tell you that he's saying. This is what I read.
This doesn't sound very good.
Of course not, because again, it could be
at all.
I totally agree with Hani here that you should give them hope, so they have something to lose. It's also, I mean, aside from the fact,
this is saying to the Palestinians basically, we will control you for the rest of your lives, and you will never have a state.
And this is certainly not a sustainable policy. Certainly not a sustainable, let's say, defense tactic. So at the end of the day, I think that we will have to hope for a leader here. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, at least in Washington and other places, he says, well, don't really pay attention to what I said before the elections. Now I'm ready. He repeated two-state solution.
He repeats it, two-state solution, and then part of his... 2 days later...
He recanted.
Yes, coalition members, 61 coalition members in the coalition. Can you actually manage them? He cannot manage his own coalition.
I think that's the ace up his sleeve. I think what he's doing is playing between the Americans and the Europeans and in a coalition. What he's doing is he's pulling the ace in front of the Americans. Yes, I'm pro two-state solution. He's coming back home, and then in front of his extreme right parts of the coalition, he says, no, don't believe them. I just said that to appease them. But he wants the Zionist Union to come into the coalition. So he said, what do you want from me? I just said two-state solution. If you come in, you'll give me the backing, will be an 80 members coalition, and then I'll be able to pass the resolution. Now, this is a very thin ice he's walking on, because right now he's dependent on each and every member of Knesset in order to pass his decisions. But and he's going to have a problem with the law of recruitment and the draft and so on in front of the ultra-Orthodox. And we already heard that MK Yoav Kish is not going to vote with the coalition. He was sent out today from the Security Committee and so on. But the thing is, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is playing on 3 different rings, and he has a problem maintaining a straight line. Unlike Naftali Bennett, who's right now, his only thing is to try and somehow chip on Benjamin Netanyahu's popularity and gain more popularity within the right.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. And, let's say I want to take you to a different note, because at the end of the day, if the Palestinians and the Israelis are not getting, used to each other, at least Israelis here and Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs still living here in the same land. And we will try to end tonight's show on a lighter note. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira paid a visit to Israeli city of Lod, known for its rich history and the unique manner in which Jews and Arabs coexist.
This beautiful mosaic, located in the central Israeli city of Lod, was covered under dust and cement for years. Perhaps a metaphor of the city itself, a place of great historical sites, coexistence and culture, buried under poverty, neglect and crime. The history of Lod goes back almost 8,000 years.
The Roman period, this city was a very rich city, and it's very important because it was the capital of the district.
But while other cities in the region, such as Jerusalem and Bethlehem, are non-tourist attractions, Lod remains far off the tourist trail. And if it is known at all, it is because of the nearby airport. Each November 16th, hundreds of Lod's residents and officials gather at the St. George Greek Orthodox Church to celebrate a special feast commemorating the 4th century Christian martyr, St. George, who, according to some traditions, was born and lived in the city. The church shares the same compound with the El Khader Mosque near the old market in town. The iconic image of St. George as he kills a dragon is carved across the church.
St. George is significant to Christianity because he helped to spread the religion, and he proved that Jesus and God are real.
Shared by Jews and Arabs, the city has an interesting demographic combination which may lead to tension between the different groups in town. However, the current wave of violence seems to have passed Lod by, and no major incident has been recorded in the city. Our next stop is the new high-tech industry park on the outskirts of the city. Some of the biggest companies in Israel are located here, alongside new startup companies. Many of them include Arab and Jewish entrepreneurs who work side by side to develop new innovating products.
Well, we live together, so there's no, there's no reason why not to work together. And, working together, we develop a common culture.
There are many facets and many sides to this small city. And although many people see it as a backyard of Tel Aviv, the cultural center of the country, Lod continues to be a hidden gem, sandwiched between poverty and a glorious history.
And with me right now here in the studio is Uri Shapira, I-24 News correspondent. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
It's not the first time that you examine this phenomena or these cities, Lod and Ramle, and there is something different in these cities than in Haifa and Nazareth or any other mixed city in Israel.
Well, if we talk about coexistence, we have to remember first that as opposed to Jerusalem, Lod and Ramle and Haifa are not in the seam zone. They are not they're not border cities, and most of the Arab population they're not seeing themselves as Palestinians, don't identify with the Palestinian identity. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think, last week we talked about Kanaya Galil, which is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, yes. Very similar to Lod, I think. We can see coexistence there. And I think the similarity is that the social gap is not that big in these kind of areas.
It's not that big, and it seems that people are finding more common ground when you're suffering from the same issues. What do you think that in these cities, in these neighborhoods, people or the government is not putting more investments there and putting more money to actually make them, these places, as examples to the rest of the community?
Well, I was very surprised to tour the city. The city is quite nice. I wouldn't say it's beautiful, but it has some interesting spots. In 2003, the city council was dissolved by the Interior Ministry, and there was a temporary council for 10 years, actually. And I think it's a combination of neglection and poor management of the city that brought it to this position.
What are the people in these neighborhoods are telling you? Do you hear from them the same reasons of desperation? Do you hear from them the same reasons of hope, or what? How do they feel with the situation?
Well, there was some attempts for terror attacks also in Lod, but you didn't see it that much, not like at the same scale that you see it in Jerusalem or like what happened today in Tel Aviv. It's very complicated.
It's definitely more complicated. And when we think about it, these places specifically has the criminal issue is so big in these neighborhoods, in Lod and Ramle, and like very poor neighborhoods. And for me, I think that these places, even when you're suffering from a very, very problematic economic situation, eventually you can find hope and you can find a way to actually coexist. Like
for sure, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Uri Shapira, thank you very much. And that's it for this week from the Jaffa Port, from I-24 News. We wish you all the best, a quiet weekend, and may God be with us all. Good evening.